Section 25 of Villette by Charlotte Bronte. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune, Section 25. Indeed, there was no way to keep well under the circumstances. At last, a day and night of peculiarly agonizing depression were succeeded by physical illness. I took perforce to my bed. About this time, the Indian summer closed and the equinoctial storms began, and for 9 dark and wet days, of which the hours rushed on all turbulent, deaf, dishevelled, bewildered with sounding hurricane, I lay in a strange fever of the nerves and blood. Sleep went quite away. I used to rise in the night, look round for her, beseech her earnestly to return. A rattle of the window, a cry of the blast, only replied, sleep never came. She came once, but in anger. Impatient of my importunity, she brought with her an avenging dream. By the clock of St. Jean Baptiste, that dream remained scarce 15 minutes. A brief space, but sufficing to wring my whole frame with unknown anguish, to confer a nameless experience that had the hue, the mien, the terror, the very tone of a visitation from eternity. Between 12 and 1 that night, a cup was forced to my lips, black, strong, strange, drawn from no well, but filled up, seething from a bottomless and boundless sea. Suffering, brewed in temporal or calculable measure, and mixed for mortal lips, tastes not as this suffering tasted. Having drank and woke, I thought all was over, the end come and passed by, trembling fearfully as consciousness returned, ready to cry out on some fellow creature to help me, only that I knew no fellow creature was near enough to catch the wild summons. Goton in her far distant attic could not hear. I rose on my knees in bed. Some fearful hours went over me. Indescribably was I torn, racked, and oppressed in mind. Amidst the horrors of that dream, I think the worst lay here. Methought the well-loved dead, who had loved me well in life, met me elsewhere, alienated. Galled was my inmost spirit with an unutterable sense of despair about the future. Motive there was none, why I should try to recover or wish to live, and yet quite unendurable was the pitiless and haughty voice in which death challenged me to engage his unknown terrors. When I tried to pray, I could only utter these words: From my youth up, thy terrors have I suffered with a troubled mind. Most true was it. On bringing me my tea next morning, Goton urged me to call in a doctor. I would not. I thought no doctor could cure me. One evening, and I was not delirious, I was in my sane mind, I got up, I dressed myself, weak and shaking. The solitude and the stillness of the long dormitory could not be borne any longer. The ghastly white beds were turning into spectres. The coronal of each became a death's head, huge and sun-bleached. Dead dreams of an elder world and mightier race lay frozen in their wide gaping eye-holes. That evening, more firmly than ever, fastened into my soul the conviction that fate was of stone and hope a false idol, blind, bloodless, and of granite core. I felt, too, that the trial God had appointed me was gaining its climax, and must now be turned by my own hands, hot, feeble, trembling as they were. It rained still and blew, but with more clemency, I thought, than it had poured and raged all day. Twilight was falling, and I deemed its influence pitiful. From the lattice I saw coming night clouds, trailing low like banners drooping. It seemed to me that at this hour there was affliction and sorrow in heaven above, for all pain suffered on earth beneath. The weight of my dreadful dream became alleviated. That insufferable thought of being no more loved, no more owned, half yielded to hope of the contrary. I was sure this hope would shine clearer if I got out from under this house roof, which was crushing as the slab of a tomb, and went outside the city to a certain quiet hill, a long way distant in the fields. Covered with a cloak, I could not be delirious, for I had sense and recollection to put on warm clothing. Forth I set. The bells of a church arrested me in passing. They seemed to call me into the salute, and I went in. Any solemn rite, any spectacle of sincere worship, any opening for appeal to God was as welcome to me then as bread to one in extremity of want. I knelt down with others on the stone pavement. It was an old solemn church, its pervading gloom not gilded, but purpled by light shed through stained glass. Few worshippers were assembled, and the salute over, half of them departed. I discovered soon that those left remained to confess. I did not stir. Carefully every door of the church was shut. A holy quiet sank upon, and a solemn shade gathered about us. After a space, breathless and spent in prayer, a penitent approached the confessional. I watched. She whispered her avowal. Her shrift was whispered back. She returned, consoled. Another went, and another. A pale lady, kneeling near me, said in a low, kind voice, "Go you now. I am not quite prepared." Mechanically obedient, I rose and went. I knew what I was about. My mind had run over the intent with lightning speed. To take this step could not make me more wretched than I was. It might soothe me. The priest within the confessional never turned his eyes to regard me. He only quietly inclined his ear to my lips. He might be a good man, but this duty had become to him a sort of form. He went through it with the phlegm of custom. I hesitated. Of the formula of confession I was ignorant. Instead of commencing then with the prelude usual, I said, "Mon Père, je suis Protestant." He directly turned. He was not a native priest. Of that class, the cast of physiognomy is almost invariably grovelling. I saw by his profile and brow he was a Frenchman. Though grey and advanced in years, he did not, I think, lack feeling or intelligence. He inquired, not unkindly, why, being a Protestant, I came to him. I said I was perishing for a word of advice or an accent of comfort. I had been living for some weeks quite alone. I had been ill. I had a pressure of affliction on my mind, of which it would hardly any longer endure the weight. Was it a sin, a crime? He inquired, somewhat startled. I reassured him on this point, and, as well as I could, I showed him the mere outline of my experience. He looked thoughtful, surprised, puzzled. "You take me unawares," said he. "I have not had such a case as yours before. Ordinarily, we know our routine, and are prepared. But this makes a great break in the common course of confession. I am hardly furnished with counsel fitting the circumstances. Of course, I had not expected he would be, but the mere relief of communication in an ear which was human and sentient, yet consecrated, the mere pouring out of some portion of long accumulating, long pent-up pain into a vessel whence it could not be again diffused, had done me good. I was already solaced. "Must I go, father?" I asked of him, as he sat silent. "My daughter," he said kindly, and I am sure he was a kind man. He had a compassionate eye. "For the present you had better go, but I assure you your words have struck me. Confession, like other things, is apt to become formal and trivial with habit. You have come and poured your heart out, a thing seldom done. I would fain think your case over, and take it with me to my oratory. Were you of our faith, I should know what to say. A mind so tossed can find repose but in the bosom of retreat and the punctual practice of piety. The world, it is well known, has no satisfaction for that class of natures. Holy men have bidden penitents like you to hasten their path upward by penance, self-denial, and difficult good works. Tears are given them here for meat and drink, bread of affliction and waters of affliction. Their recompense comes hereafter. It is my own conviction that these impressions under which you are smarting are messengers from God to bring you back to the true church. You were made for our faith. Depend upon it, our faith alone could heal and help you. Protestantism is altogether too dry, cold, prosaic for you. The further I look into this matter, the more plainly I see it is entirely out of the common order of things. On no account would I lose sight of you. Go, my daughter, for the present, but return to me again." I rose and thanked him. I was withdrawing when he signed me to return. "You must not come to this church," said he. "I see you are ill, and this church is too cold. You must come to my house. I live—" and he gave me his address. "Be there tomorrow morning at 10. In reply to this appointment I only bowed, and pulling down my veil, and gathering round me my cloak, I glided away. Did I, do you suppose, reader, contemplate venturing again within that worthy priest's reach? As soon should I have thought of walking into a Babylonish furnace. That priest had arms which could influence me. He was naturally kind, with a sentimental French kindness, to whose softness I knew myself not wholly impervious. Without respecting some sorts of affection, there was hardly any sort having a fibre of root in reality which I could rely on my force wholly to withstand. Had I gone to him, he would have shown me all that was tender and comforting and gentle in the honest popish superstition. Then he would have tried to kindle, blow, and stir up in me the zeal of good works. I know not how it would all have ended. We all think ourselves strong in some points. We all know ourselves weak in many. The probabilities are, had I visited numero 10, Rue des Manges, the probabilities are that had I visited numero 10, Rue des Manges, at the hour and day appointed, I might just now, instead of writing this heretic narrative, be counting my beads in the cell of a certain Carmelite convent on the boulevard of Crécy in Villette. There was something of Fenelon about that benign old priest, and whatever most of his brethren may be, and whatever I may think of his church and creed, and I like neither, of himself I must ever retain a grateful recollection. He was kind when I needed kindness. He did me good. May heaven bless him. Twilight had passed into night, and the lamps were lit in the streets, ere I issued from that sombre church. To turn back was now become possible to me. The wild longing to breathe this October wind on the little hill, far without the city walls, had ceased to be an imperative impulse, and was softened into a wish with which reason could cope. She put it down, and I turned, as I thought, to the Rue Fossette. But I had become involved in a part of the city with which I was not familiar. It was the old part, and full of narrow streets of picturesque, ancient, and mouldering houses. I was much too weak to be very collected, and I was still too careless of my own welfare and safety to be cautious. I grew embarrassed. I got enmeshed in a network of turns unknown. I was lost, and had no resolution to ask guidance of any passenger. If the storm had lulled a little at sunset, it made up now for lost time. Strong and horizontal thundered the current of the wind from northwest to southeast. It brought rain like spray, and sometimes a sharp hail, like shot. It was cold and pierced me to the vitals. I bent my head to meet it, but it beat me back. My heart did not fail at all in this conflict. I only wished that I had wings, and could ascend the gale, spread and repose my pinions on its strength, career in its course, sweep where it swept. While wishing this, I suddenly felt colder where before I was cold, and more powerless where before I was weak. I tried to reach the porch of a great building near, but the mass of frontage and the giant spire turned black and vanished from my eyes. Instead of sinking on the steps as I intended, I seemed to pitch headlong down an abyss. I remember no more. End of section 25. Recording by Leanne Fortune.